Welcome to ShiftED podcast. This is episode number 19. And today I had the great pleasure of talking to Dwayne Matthews out of his home in Toronto, Ontario. It was such a rich conversation, and man, my head's still spinning. We had lots of different thoughts and ideas about the future of education and the direction we're on and what to look forward to. I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I had having it. I mean, I heard something yesterday that this is a state's statistic, but like 300 people a day are still dying of COVID, right? So I'm sure in Canada it's not as high, but we are still in the throngs of COVID. It's not over, but we've learned how to adapt and adjust our lifestyle so that we can navigate it a little bit better. How did you see COVID maybe at the start of how you thought it might change, and then the reality of what's going on the ground nowadays?
Sure. So and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate that. And it's I find it's interesting because just before COVID, one of the shocking statistics that I had learned was that about 600,000 people die every year of the flu globally. And at the time, when I learned that, I thought, gosh, that's a really high number. And I found it very concerning. And, now here we are on the other side of the pandemic, and we're moving into an endemic phase where we sort of have that bubbling just in the background, very much like the flu. A lot of the flu is passed through schools and playgrounds and that sort of stuff. And we manage the risk. So one of the things that we're very good at as a species is first looking at the reality of something, going through the different emotions of that reality, and then adjusting and managing the risk, and then creating a story based on that managed risk, right? So school is a perfect example. We've learned that, some of the most harmful things happen when we sit for long periods of time. But the upside of a book is so high and so profound that we decide that, we're going to send our kids to have them sit with strangers for 6 hours a day for about the first 12 years of their life, to master this printed book technology, because it has such a profound impact on their future prosperity. And so, I think COVID reminds me a lot of that, but it was a lot more extreme, right? We went through a moment of sheer panic and terror where, we walked into grocery stores, we were completely covered. Some people were coming in and, getting all their clothes off in the foyer and stockpiling toilet paper. And then we went to following all the instructions and believing generally in what the experts had to say. And then we went to denial and discontent with the experts and lack of trust. And on the other side of it, we went through a very similar cadence to the last pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic, which actually wasn't Spanish at all, but the Spanish flu pandemic, where we went through the masks, the gloves, we're not doing that. We're going out and taking on the risk. The similar financial events happened. Lots of printing of money, the roaring 20s, if you will, and followed by we won't say a recession, we'll say a slowdown, as the clawback from the interest. And so we're following similar patterns, but we have a few new tools, and those new tools allow us to not exactly repeat history, but while history is rhyming, it creates some really big possibilities for us to transform certain things. So just to provide a little bit of context, your question was, what has changed and what's not changed? I think the first thing that's changed is the possibility, right? So the possibility of everybody responding very quickly was there, something that no one thought could happen, right? I've gone to, university after university that said we went online in like 2 weeks, right? We went online in like 1 week. And before that, we were having debates about whether we could do it, if there was any efficacy to it. Even here in Ontario, where I am, the Toronto District School Board, the teachers were about to go on strike. Actually, around online learning was one of the issues that they were very concerned about. And all of a sudden, strike was over. Everyone was online. What didn't change? What didn't change was what people decided to do en masse was reasonably illogical but understandable. They decided to go online synchronously, right? So they thought, you know what, we'll replace the 6-hour day with 6 hours in front of a two-dimensional screen with synchronous time. And, when we look back at that, it really is illogical. If I gave you your most favorite bottle of wine, assuming that you drink wine, and I told you, find me your absolutely most favorite show on your video streaming service, and I'm going to have you sit for 192 days for 6 hours a day watching that show, chances are you would not find it as interesting maybe 4 weeks into it of straight binging, right? And that would be your favorite show with hundreds of millions of dollars put into it. I go and, what we asked kids and teachers to do is to go into a one-dimensional white room with maybe a picture in the back and listen to a teacher that was not trained, has no camera crew, no script crew, no wardrobe changes, and say, let's have all the kids sit down and do this for hours at a time. It wasn't surprising that most people thought, gosh, that was an abysmal failure. But I think what it also does is that it exposed the fact that actually that's what we ask kids to do in person. And the success rate of kids doing that in person historically across most OECD countries is 30% if we use the indicator of post-secondary education. That's not just university, that's post-secondary education in general, is 30%. So ironically, school as a system, if it was to grade itself, the maximum output is somewhere between 30%, and Canada, by the way, has the highest post-secondary educated population in the world, 50%.
Wow.
Right? And we, part of that's our education system, part of that's our immigration system, right? So we're not even 100% sure if we're putting out at 50%, but that's the population that we have. So I think when we look at that, what I see people say, well, it's the system's broken. No, I don't see that. What I see is an opportunity for growth. And that opportunity is exciting because if we can go from 30% to 50% or from 50% to 70%, we'll have a profound impact on people. We'll have a profound impact on families, on communities, on prosperity, and on the country itself. And I'm actually thrilled by that opportunity. So I think on one side, it's sort of dismal, but on the other side, boy, if we move the needle just a little bit, right, how exciting that would be if we got to 65%.
Oh, absolutely. There's something that you said too about educators. You asked the question is, what exactly do we do? Right. I mean, I remember at your talk that I saw you at the LCEQ conference, and it had me like it's a simple thought, but what is it exactly that educators do? And if we look at the two dynamics that we had, the in-person versus the online, like one just seemed to replace the, they just kind of took the same thing and put it online and away you go. How do you answer that question? Like, what's educate? What do we do? What do we do?
So I think, I had the privilege to teach at a really exceptional school between 2003 and 2005 in South America. And one of the things that the superintendent would always talk about is the hard work is finding the common north, right? What is the North Star? And he goes, what happens is we typically get lost in the tactical application. And this is not just education, right? I'll give you an example. We optimize for form over function, right? We optimize for form over function. So the example that I gave at the talk, I may or may not have given this example, was the example of the suitcase and the wheel.
Yes.
Right? The wheel is one of humans' first inventions. And in my lifetime was the first time that they put a wheel on a suitcase. Right? And I have a suitcase that actually has two wheels and it has to be pulled behind me. But my son has a suitcase that has bidirectional wheels. And that also happened in my lifetime. So if you think about, we've been flying for a little bit over 100 years. It's taken us about 100 years to take the first invention that we can think of, or at least one of the first inventions, and combine it with a suitcase. But we have red suitcases, big suitcases, small suitcases, leather suitcases. We have, the lightweight plastic suitcases, heavy suitcases. Why did it take so long? Well, because we optimized for the form of the suitcase, right? We thought, we'll make this just a little bit better, just the same way the teachers optimize for the form of the classroom. We'll make it digital and synchronous, and we'll be able to connect. And, when we're in the physical classroom, maybe we'll add a smart board, which is like a blackboard. When we're adopting technology, we'll add Google Classroom, which is just really like paper and a filing system, right? But in terms of transformative things, not so much. So what do? We have to really come back to that question. And this was something that I faced when I became a father. I sat back and I thought, I did all these things with my son, and I realized that all the things that I was doing was not for him; it was for me. Right? Like I wanted to walk him to school, and I wanted to teach him how to throw a ball, and all these things were ideas that I had in my head, and I tried to tweak that a little bit. But then I sat back and I thought, what's my actual job as a father? Right? What makes me unique that's different from his friends, that says this is the North Star? And so when things get difficult, I can say, this is what I'm doing. So when I have him doing projects and he's like, I'm like, what's my role as a father? I repeat it to him and I repeat to me. I go, my role is to help you to be a man of character. My role is to help you to thrive in future prosperity. And I can't take my eye off of that. Right. So even when it's difficult for me, that's what I have to do. If I have to commit 50% of all the money that I make to that end, but I'm focused on that end. So it doesn't hurt me if I don't get to the beach, right? Because I'm like, this is my role. Now, that doesn't mean that it's everybody's role, but it means that it's my role. Now, let's go back to education. The Prussian model that we have was based on nation building, right? It was actually sort of a dictatorial character that wanted to create a nation. Ironically, Prussia's gone, but we still have the Prussian model of school. And so the idea was really to think about how can we create contributing members of society, so we were comfortable as a society in general with 30% going on to post-secondary, because that's sort of the office jobs, the bankers, the lawyers, the professionals, that sort of stuff. The vast majority of people worked in production, in manufacturing, that sort of stuff. And so, that transformed society. And we went from an agricultural society to an industrial society. And then we started to make little iterations, and so we got a union. And so we got a weekend. Eventually we got homes, and then we came up with mortgages. And then we realized, boy, we could extract value from a mortgage and create a middle class. And all of these things really sort of hinge on school. School is about trying to create more prosperity. And hopefully, as that prosperity grew, more and more people became prosperous, and we became more safe. We became more peaceful as a species. And now when we look, we think, okay, well, formal school is about future preparedness. So how do we prepare our students to thrive in the near and distant future? And once we understand it's about future preparedness, then we have to take a really good stab at, what does that future look like? And that's tricky, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's really tricky because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we do have some patterns and we do have some clues. And if we spend some time thinking about that as educators, then we can think, okay, we don't have to be overwhelmed by everything that's happening. We really just have to narrow our focus and think, how do we prepare the students for 2030 and beyond? The question that I ask often is, are we preparing students for 2019 and before? Or are we preparing students for 2030 and beyond? And 2030 now seems so far out. Really, are we preparing students for April 2023?
I know. Time is relentless, eh? It just never stops. And so, I love what you're saying, that is our Northern Star needing a shift? And do we have the capacity to make that? Because I know that you always say incremental and small, right? It has to go slow. It can't happen overnight. But how do you shift that Northern Star for educators from the cog in the system to adapting, right? This cog now is starting to morph into something that needs to have different feels and different colors and different varieties. But we're still kind of fixated on that, getting them ready for a system that really doesn't exist much anymore.
Right. So I think the way that we go about doing that is we optimize for function over form. I'll give you an example. And this is not me. This is Clayton, the late Clayton Christensen, Harvard professor, who's well known for disruptive innovative theory. And he has a concept that I think is a great concept. It's called the job to be done. And I'm a big believer, and my bias leans towards the job to be done. And so it really is thinking about what specifically is the job to be done, and then going out and thinking about what tools you need to get that job done. So the North Star doesn't change. The North Star is still the North Star. So focusing on the function is what becomes important, versus inwardly looking and focusing on just the specific tactics, right? The North Star is the same. School at scale is about future preparedness, thriving, and future prosperity for self, for family, for region, for country, right? So that's really the fundamental basics to it. And here in North America, we're quite privileged to have some more time to reflect. I deal with a lot of international students. A lot of those students are very, very focused on this. We can say, hey, we have this, we have that. They're like, I need to get to Canada. I need to get a good education. I need to get a really good paying job. And I need to send money back to my family from the country that I came in. That's it, right? Everything else that you have to tell me is extra. right? Like that's fundamentally it. You know, there's something like $600 billion of remittance in the world. That's people sending money back to their home countries. And it's a profoundly focused, driven thing where, you know, families will look at 5 kids and say, I can't pay for all of you to go to school, but you're going, right? And you know, I was speaking to one family. I said, well, you know, why a doctor? Do they love medicine? We don't know. I don't know if he loves medicine. How could he love medicine? How could this be his passion if he's never been a doctor? But what we do know, it's the fastest way to transform socioeconomic status.
Okay.
And it's the most immediate and direct way, right? You're not a doctor, you become a doctor, your pay grade goes up a couple of orders of magnitude, send money back home. They go pretty simple. They go more so than an engineer, more so than a lawyer, doctor, right? And so there are places around the world where this is right there in front of us. But here in North America, we have more options and we have more distractions. And so it's harder for us to get to the kernel of those components. And that's neither good or bad. It just is. And so I think for us coming back to function over form, when we focus on function, we'll find that we can change certain aspects of the form. Let me give a precise example. Clayton Christensen. Once upon a time, we needed to go from point A to point B. So we walked, right? I believe you're in Quebec. If I have to walk there, it would take me days, right? But that's how I would get to you at the beginning. And then, you know, somebody saw, hey, look, we could get on a horse. So maybe it doesn't take me a month, but now it might take me 3 days on the horse. My job is still to get from A to B. Right. And then somebody says, you know what? Henry Ford comes along and says, I have something really extraordinary, right? It's not as efficient as a horse just yet, but it will be. And it's called a car. People said, well, what is that? Like, how do we know how it works? It's like, we'll just think about it in terms of horsepower. This car has 1 horsepower, 2 horsepower. Now people think about the car has 500 horsepower, which means it's really fast, right? But we still talk in terms of horsepower, right? 500 horses, roughly. And then we decided, you know, we could take the train, right? So now we could still travel from A to B, but we're not engaged, right? We can relax. It's about the same time. And then our children discovered social media and realized we don't have to get from point A to point B. We'll make shallow connections with everybody via our devices. So you'll find most places in the world, young boys and girls are not as excited to get their driver's license as you and I might have been, because they don't need to get to point A and point B. So the job is always point A and point B to make connections. Right. So you can see the different stages where it's accelerated. You have inflection points and it's plateaued. So we accelerated from foot to horse to car, huge inflection point. Car, right? What did we do? We optimize for form versus function. So the car just got a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Up to today, cars get a little bit better every iteration. Right. I'm always amazed that, you know, I can see a favorite car and think it's the most beautiful car in the world. And the next version is just a little bit more beautiful than I thought it was and a little bit better than I thought it was. Right. But then there's this inflection point. So the digital device and social media was a huge inflection point, and it was a transformation. The job to be done is shallow connections, which is why I was going from point A to point B. Right. But now I can create these shallow connections through a digital device at scale. And so all of a sudden, point A to point B, still important, but not the only game in town. And so, Absolutely. You know, that transforms. And so I think thinking about the function in terms of education, we can start to think about what to do. Let me give you one last example, right? If we wanted to change the function of a classroom, we can say, well, we want children to thrive in the future. So sitting down for 6 hours a day is a bad idea, right? We know that the leading cause of death is not war, is not terrorism, it's not COVID. The leading cause of death is heart disease. And heart disease is diet and sedentary lifestyle and we go to school, and there's really bad habits that are taught there. We call them treats, right? At school,
Hmm.
sugar and, red dye number three, and, all kinds of long things that we give at Halloween, and all these things that we know that are detrimental, and sitting is detrimental. So a transformation could be, okay, well, if we want these kids to thrive, we also know that movement helps with thinking. We could start to break up school into 90-minute blocks and have kids moving for 20, 30 minutes every 90 minutes, and break down learning into small micro lessons. And those small micro lessons have self-assessment points, and those self-assessment points are self-paced over time. We can do that today. The challenge is, well, people will say, well, no, we can't. And when it really comes down to it, we can't, because we have a huge investment into real estate being formed in a certain way. And that would really change the investment of real estate.
Hmm.
So optimizing for form versus function.
Right.
What we need to
Right.
do is optimize for function versus form.
Right. Right. And practically, like, how do you, I imagine teachers often, after listening to you speak, what can I do? Like, where does the practicality of this start to happen? Like, teachers often ask me, like, what are some strategies, or how can I get some support in making a small shift, right? Because I always say small shifts, little incremental is where it's at. Let's not overwhelm you with too much. How do you suggest to teachers how to start this shifting of practice?
Sure. So that's where Tomorrow Now Learning Lab came to be.
Right.
So my son and I founded Tomorrow Now Learning Lab, I think at the beginning of COVID. And, at the time, I think he might have been 10 or 11 at the beginning
Mm.
of COVID. And we were just thinking of, well, what could we do and how could we do it different? And so we rented a small space, and we pulled in different technologies to create a protocol. And in that protocol, and then we created different ways for us to connect with different students around the world, in different form factors. And
Mm.
we did that. We wanted to create a demonstration of what was possible, and to get a sense of, could we make it work? Could we increase his engagement? Could we still have academic rigor? Could we have a sense of agency while we still went through requirements? Could we blend those two things together? And we realized that we definitely could. And so once upon a time, I was involved in a field called open innovation. And one of the things that I did was I worked on behalf of Fortune 500 companies. I had my own company, and our job was to find every single technology, every single person, every single patent that was going to transform a specific industry around a specific problem,
Mm.
right? And I realized that by doing that, you could create a funnel, if you will, to see these innovations and bring them into the actual company or spin out new companies.
Mm-hmm.
The organization that I saw that did this the best was probably Shell. And at that moment, I started to realize that this would be something that is specifically what the world of education needs.
Mm.
So what you do is you break into two teams. You break into the team that's called the blue team, and the team that's called the red team. Now, there are different iterations of red team, blue team strategy, but in open innovation itself, the way that the red team, blue team strategy worked was the blue team looked at what is happening now, what is the status quo, and how do we make incremental improvements on that status quo, and who is interested in being in that boat. You probably will find the vast majority of people, that's the boat they want to be in. Show me some incremental changes. I'm super happy. because I want to know, what can I do tomorrow, right? What strategies can I implement tomorrow? And so, that's the smart board. That's okay. We can do quizzes with the smart board. Okay, we can move those quizzes to Kahoot, and that's super engaging. We can do Kahoot on Fridays, and that's super engaging. Those are great innovations that fit within the actual form factor. Then we create the red team, and the red team starts to think about, okay, let's go out and let's think about what's out there, and let's start to pull what's out there in, and let's create an environment where we can have students and their parents decide that they want in on the red team action, and we give certain assurances. So we give assurances that you're still going to be trained academically, there's still going to be academic rigor, but we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. So, maybe we're using virtual reality. Maybe we're learning asynchronously. Maybe we're moving about. Maybe we're looking at different types of technologies that enhance cognitive abilities and not content, right? Maybe we're looking at combining of both. But you have this blue team and this red team. And in every school, there are teachers who are like, something's got to change. I'm dying in here. I need something to change, and I want to do something super cool, and I want to see, what's going on. I'll give you an example. Just out there in Quebec, there's a brilliant professor by the name of Dr. Jocelyn Faubert, and he came up with a platform called a 3D MOT, motion object tracking. And he designed this to enhance the cognitive abilities of athletes at the beginning. It was then used to enhance the cognitive abilities of Air Force pilots. It was then used to enhance the cognitive abilities of video game teams, right? Esports teams. And what we learned, I had a chance to consult with him, and we did a project in school. And what we learned is we could understand a little bit about mental preparedness. We could understand a little bit about selective and sustained attention, and we could increase mental processing speeds and increase selective and sustained attention and get a sense of mental readiness or lack of mental readiness and deal with it in the moment. And essentially the idea was, well, could we increase academic performance, right? Could we increase the ability to deal with all of the information coming in, right? And, the non-scientific answer is, yeah, we probably could. So how would we design for that? We stopped short of that because it made more sense for them to go into a different direction. But those are some of the kinds of things that we can think about that are interesting. And out of that, one of the professors, Scotch, and I forget his name, pointed out a rhythm of attention. And now I know it to be called the ultradian rhythm, which he's like, look at how the attention span's going, right? It's like in these 90-minute chunks, and it needs like a 20-minute break. And then we learned just last year that there was a study done in Sweden that says an hour of video games a day, certain types of video games, actually increases IQ points by 2, right? 2 whole IQ points. And, technically we thought that my IQ judged when I was 15 should be the same now. But the fact that you can increase that. So we start to realize there's all of these things happening in many different industries. It can have a profound impact on going from 30 to 50% to 50 to 75% and future preparedness and prosperity. One of the other things that I thought was super interesting that's just come out recently is the idea of writing and creativity. So I saw a job post from Anthropic AI for a prompt engineer, and it was posted at somewhere between $250,000 and $335,000. And they're like, we don't really have any requirements because it's such a new position. We just want the person to come down and write prompts and see, what could they do with this AI, and we'll hire them based on that. And right, so I'm like, there's a world of 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds that it could take a crack at this and would probably do a really good job and get the job. and,
Yeah.
and finish grade 12 while they're making about $200,000-$300,000,
That's
just
insane.
coming up with creative things, right? So
Right.
there are all of these different things, and there's all of these different opportunities. And I think creating the red team, blue team strategy for school
Mm-hmm.
is the path forward. I'm working on a number of schools, starting to create these types of teams, and just the early outputs is actually really fascinating stuff.
That's really cool. Uh, I think that you had mentioned too human capital, right? Like that's that's also a direction that we're headed towards, right? Like if we're looking long term, because I do think sometimes we get blinders, we're looking a year ahead, 2 years ahead, and we're not looking at that. And you had mentioned something about Singapore. I watched one of your interviews, and you were talking about human capital and that how that is a direction that needs to be discussed or observed or appreciated, because that's kind of a direction that we're headed towards long term.
Sure. So I'm a big fan of, and it's probably a bias, um, definitely is a bias, but I'm a big fan of AI by itself. Um, is not going to do it.
Mm.
Expert by themselves is not going to do it. But human plus AI, HI plus AI, that's like, when I talk in some of my keynotes, I say we're raising superheroes. And
Right.
that's essentially what I mean. The analogy that I might use is, let's say, like an Iron Man, or the recent Black Panther with
Mm.
Princess Shuri, right? Where and Princess Shuri is actually a great example, because she's a really small, light looking person, and she leverages technology and her brain to turn herself into this really strong, powerful leader that takes on a metahuman in
Right.
in the movie.
Yeah.
And it's a driving theme through the Black Panther movies and some of the Marvel characters. Iron Man is another one that you can think about, where he's a regular person, but
Mm-hmm.
he leverages his brain and his innovation and his capital. They both leverage their capital, um, to be able to transform themselves into superheroes, right? So he's fighting alongside the Asgardian. And so I'm a big fan of leveraging the human capital. I'm also a big fan of, if something within a system becomes a commodity on one end, something on the other side of that system decommodifies. In the classic industrial system, the human is the commodity. We're in the factory, you take one human out, you put another human in, it really doesn't matter,
Right.
right? Are you a strong, able-bodied person? You can work in this factory, right? You're working at an office job. You're an accountant. You take the accountant out, you put another accountant in. It doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Um, but today, the human plus the AI is decommoditizing. Like that, when a company says we want to hire somebody, we don't really care what degree you have. We just want to know how well can you make this machine move. And the first 100 of you that gets past a certain level, we want you in,
Right.
right? We don't care where you come from in the world. We don't care if you're German, if you're Swiss, if you're Nigerian, if you're Ghanaian, if you're South African. We don't care if you're a goat. We just want you. If you can do this, if you're an octopus and you can do this really well, that's going to be super important. So I think that becomes very important. And why does it become important? Is because it really is an intersection between a person's lived experience, their intellect, their personality, their ability to create fit. That intersectionality becomes really unique. You may be brilliant at prompt engineering. I may be brilliant at prompt engineering, but your cultural perspective of being from Quebec, my cultural perspective of being Canadian that grew up in the Caribbean, that came back to Canada and lived in South America, those two perspectives are going to have value within that system somewhere along the line. And that's kind of the direction I think that we're going in. And when we don't go in that direction, then it's the direction of everybody contributing, right? So to AI, one of the big pieces, and I think a conversation we have to have is we're training these AIs and they're now worth billions of dollars. Yep. At some point, we're going to have a conversation. I go, if I'm training the AI, it sounds like I'm working. And if I'm working, then I should be compensated for my work. Right? Like,
yeah.
If I'm working, if every time I punch in something in Chat GPT and it's getting smarter and it's now making billions of dollars, that sounds like I'm an employee already. And if I'm not getting paid, then it sounds like something that historically my people know a little bit about. It's very uncomfortable. And, I'm not really interested in us going back to that. So again, the human capital becomes critical. If we all decided not to use Chat GPT, and if we all decided not to allow our data to be used by Chat GPT, the experiment would fail.
That's right. I never thought about that, but yes. Well, I mean, it's like free labor in a sense.
Not like it is free labor. Yeah, it's like really cool. Here are some trinkets, right? We'll give you a grade 5 essay, but we want all of your thoughts. We want all of them, and we're going to tell you that's what we're doing. We're collecting your thoughts. We're training the AI, and then we're going to keep the really good stuff, and we'll charge you $20 back for it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that's precisely amazing. How it works, right? Like the enslaved people of the Caribbean, they essentially, they worked for free. They pulled up all the sugar out the ground. It went to Europe and it came back as goods.
Right.
That the people, in the Caribbean, the Europeans in the Caribbean, and, eventually the free people in the Caribbean, the indentured laborers in the Caribbean, they had to purchase, right? And now they people get paid a little bit, but not a lot, but it's the same dynamic, right? So I think there's a real opportunity here for people to start saying, I think I should be paid for my interaction. If I'm getting paid to send an email for work, I should be paid for training the machine.
Wow. Yes. Yes. Well, Dwayne Matthews, I want to thank you. We're going to leave it on that because it's a real yes. You've really thrown some big questions and also some really interesting ideas out this morning. And I really appreciate it. It's a real treat to talk with you and just ride your knowledge and your wisdom in this talk that we've had. So I appreciate that.
Thank you very much. And I'll say that I appreciate you reaching out, and I always appreciate the opportunity to respond to really thoughtful, open-ended questions. And you've had a lot of really thoughtful, open-ended questions, which sort of forced me to think about things. And a lot of the questions, most of the questions were unscripted today, and so it really sort of forced me to think about things. And I appreciate anyone that challenges me. There's some things that you've said that I'm even going to go and spend a little bit more time thinking about, maybe over a cup of coffee. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I wish you a really wonderful weekend. And hopefully our paths cross again. I'm sure I will be looking out for you and following your thought patterns as they progress through these really amazing times that we're going through right now. So I appreciate that a lot. And I wish you a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You too. Have a great weekend.
Thanks. Hey.